So pleased to be here. I am 36 weeks pregnant today, so I certainly wouldn't have been there in person. So it's a really nice uh, byproduct of the pandemic that I'm able to be here with you all tonight. So this is obviously weird. I can't see any of you, and I've got no idea whether you're smiling or frowning. But I'm going to jump right in anyway. We're going to do a little creative challenge together to start, and then I'm going to talk through some of our work and the kind of history of our work, and again, like Pete said, some case studies, and then there'll be hopefully lots of time for us to have some Q&A at the end. So before we begin, this is going to take 2 or 3 minutes. Don't worry, I can't see whether you're participating or not, but I would encourage you to. I want you to find in your immediate vicinity, so anything around you, I don't know if you're on your sofa or at a desk or whatever, any inanimate object. So I have on my desk, embarrassingly, these are things I actually have on my desk, a paintbrush, a mug, a lemon, randomly, and some chocolate wrappers because I needed a sugar boost before we started. So anything completely random from where you are. And I want you to imagine it's a character. So I want you to give it a name, think about what its superpower is, and imagine what it's doing and why it's in your house. Okay, so pick an object, give it a name, give it a superpower, and think about what it's doing in your house. Now, I'll give you 2 or 3 minutes to do it. I'm going to do it too. And then if you want to, you don't have to, you can post in the chat and tell us who you've come up with. So 2 minutes to do it. Find an object, give it a character, give it a name, a superpower, and find out what it's doing in your house. So go. I can imagine you all currently scrambling. Pete, you can do it too, you know. You haven't got any yet. He's like, I'm in a place, there's no objects around me. You can also do it in your imagination. So the clock's ticking down, probably halfway through about now. Maybe you're still in the kitchen getting your thing. I better do mine. I always think afterwards that I should have prepped these in advance for myself, but I like to feel the panic alongside you as I do it. Keep going. Okay, I'm going to give you 30 more seconds. Like I said, if you want to, you can post it in the chat, but you don't have to. You can just be here in spirit. We haven't lost any participants since we started this, so that's a good sign at least. Not all suddenly just running off. Okay, so this is my lemon. I decided that its name is Bob. And its superpower, ironically, because it's a lemon, is that it turns sour faces into happy ones. So it's designed to cheer people up. This is what the lemon is for. And it's in my house because it heard that I am very pregnant. My mother-in-law is very poorly. My son went ill today, and my husband had a bad back. Basically, it's very busy at work. Everything's kind of quite full on. So it decided that it would come here to support me tonight with its superpower. So that's Bob the lemon from me. And we'll look forward to receiving your creative challenges in the chat as the evening goes on. I'm sure you're all typing away. So before, I wanted to do that because I think one of the things that we think about a lot at 64 Million Artists is that we are often we think we're all creative, and often it's something that's kind of sits dormant within us. And there are a lot of people who would say, I'm not creative, that's not something that I do. So a lot of the way that we work is to work with really small little things, little ways of being that kind of remind people that they are. And we think that's an important thing because, like Pete said, we believe that when we are creative, we can make change in our lives and in the world around us. So I'm going to just give you a little bit of presentation stuff to talk about why we do that and how we do it. So I'm just going to share my screen. Oh, it's gone right to the end. And go into present mode. So my story starts sort of 2014. I was working here at Battersea Arts Centre, and my background, I guess, had been in the kind of formal cultural sector. So I was someone that worked on the whole in the kind of publicly funded sector and loved it, and was very happy doing that. But and I was at Battersea, which is, had been my dream job for a really long time. It was amazing. And I but at the time it was really interesting. It's very different now, Battersea Arts Centre, but at the time, artists were absolutely the kings, as they should have been in a creative arts centre. But it meant that when I wanted to have an idea, or when I would come up with something, I was just I was a producer, or I was another person, not an artist. So one of the things that I was interested in was like that I had started off as someone who loved the arts because I loved doing stuff. I loved making a mess and cooking and singing, and then now here I was, having sort of built a career around helping other people to do stuff. And at the time, I just, it was a big time in my life. I was kind of going through a breakup, lots of things were going wrong, and I decided to take a month off work, and I asked different people to set me different creative challenges to do every day. And it kind of transformed my life. Like, I went to places I'd never been to, I cooked meals I never had, I grew things in my garden, which was amazing. This one was, I left a poem for a stranger in a cafe to pick up. I had to come up with all these different creative scenarios. I went running. So people were challenging me to do things that were just, some sort of were more, I guess, traditionally creative or artsy, and some were just about exploring or inventing or trying things out. And this was my favorite, which was the challenge was to get someone over twice your age and someone under half your age to teach you their favorite dance. So this is Barbara, and she's teaching me the samba, and it was it was just an amazing moment. She was someone I wouldn't necessarily have had a relationship with otherwise. We went on to be really good friends, and I noticed that I was happier, I felt lighter. I was someone that had kind of been very obsessed with being perfect at everything and getting everything right all the time. And actually, this series of creative challenges and doing something different and having to kind of take a risk every day really helped me to kind of bust out of that and to try things I never would have before. And I was also someone that kind of would never do anything unless I thought I'd be really good at it, which is quite limiting, turns out. And I didn't get to know people that I wouldn't normally get to know. For someone who comes across as an extrovert, I guess I actually had kept my world pretty small. And at the same time as me sort of going through this personal journey, there was this really interesting narrative happening in the cultural sector where there were cuts, there was threats of cuts and all sorts of interesting stuff happening. And there's a sort of movement, which some of you may be aware of, called What Next, which I think is UK wide, but it's lots of sort of cultural sector people. And the question they seemed to be asking was, how do we get people to value culture? Like, how do we get those people over there to value this thing that we do over here? And to me, that suddenly felt like such a weird question, because it was sort of like, well, actually, we've been thinking, in the cultural sector, we tend to think art is what artists do. And at the time, the Arts Council of England had this phrase, which is great art and culture for everyone. So there's this real kind of dichotomy of, we make stuff here, and then we really, and brilliant work happening around kind of engagement and getting lots of different people to engage in that culture, but it still felt like culture was separate from everyone. And I felt like, and at the time, the guy I was working with is a guy called David Micklem. We were really interested in this question, and we started to think about, what would it look like to have a campaign about engaging people in their own existing creativity. When we think about the fact that everyone is creative and we start from there, that is a much more kind of democratic and interesting way of thinking about how we build culture and how we encourage culture in everyone, with everyone. So we set up a company called 64 Million Artists, and we started to do a whole bunch of little experiments, and that was in 2014. And we've now grown I think I went full time in 2017, and we now have 6 employees, and we work kind of all across the country and do lots and lots and lots of different things to kind of engage, to essentially to create spaces where people can find their own creativity. And why do I think this is important? And it's so funny because when I was making this presentation, I was sort of looking at an old presentation that I'd done, and it was pre-pandemic. And it was all about, why creativity is so important now when, there's high youth unemployment and there's high mental health issues and there's this, and I was like, oh, things have got a lot worse since then. But actually what's really interesting at the moment is that what I think the pandemic has done is also renewed, as well as being incredibly challenging mental health, incredibly challenging financially, incredibly challenging for people who have a particular business model which is now complete, therefore has been ended in the way that they've done it. It's also, for lots of people, given them, they've started to try things out. They're cooking different meals, or I think that's run out now. At the beginning, people were cooking different meals or trying out new hobbies, and now everyone's just tired and bored. But it's really fascinating to me, this idea that actually the definition that I like most of creativity is this one: the ability to transcend traditional ideas, rules, patterns, relationships, or the like, and to create meaningful new ideas. And to me, that definition of creativity goes so much further than a bit of painting or a bit of poetry or a bit of singing. It's about saying, when we tap into our self-expression, of who we are, when we create things, we are saying to ourselves, I have a bit of power, in this system, which I don't necessarily feel I have power in, or I could do this thing that I didn't think that I was going to be able to do. So what if I could do that over here as well? And to me, that feeling, or that, that empowerment of people by themselves, is something that's more and more and more important in the world that we live in now, because we have to be able to be agile, we have to be able to change, we have to be able to be resilient. So that's why I think creativity is more important now than ever. And I think particularly the importance, whilst I absolutely, I think the arts in general are important in a time like this, and entertainment is important, and kind of keeping people going and inspiring people is important. But I think particularly everyday creativity is important now, because it's about how we feel about ourselves and how we act in the world. So fundamentally at 64 Million Artists, what we do is we tend to work on the whole, because we work UK wide, we're very keen that we don't really kind of zoom into a place, work with the community, and zoom out again. That feels sort of counterproductive, really. You have to, you don't get to know people in the way that you want to. You can't have a real impact in that area. You don't want to assume lots of things about places that you don't know. So we're very interested in this idea of, I guess, co-creation. Although I saw a brilliant debate on Twitter the other day about what co-creation is. I don't think there are ever good words to describe any of this stuff. So I try not to land on too many most of the time. But the idea that we create spaces alongside other people for people to make and do their own stuff, and for them to make decisions and take ownership of things happening in their own local area or in their community, whether that's a kind of geographic community or a community of interest or whatever. So what we do a lot of is this idea of distributed facilitation. So we work a lot at that kind of middle community connector level. We work with nurses and teachers and youth workers and community workers and people who work in communities of people, to help them think about how to make structures and spaces that allow lots of people to get creative and have a say and be involved in their own, developing their own decisions, work, practice, whatever. And basically a lot of our work comes down to this idea of do, think, share. So you do stuff, you reflect on how it was for you, and you share that with other people. And I'm going to talk through sort of four examples of how we've done that in different places. But the reason that I keep coming back to do, think, share, and it sort of stuck with us right from the beginning, really, is that is this idea for me of the kind of important things that sit behind creativity or creative practice, or how we create communities, is this idea of agency, vulnerability, connection. Again, all words that, you know, I'm sure have problems in their own ways, but I'm really interested in this idea of when we do stuff we didn't think we could do before, how we suddenly have a sense of, oh, actually, I might be able to do something else as well. And, you know, we actually run lots of leadership work in a lot in universities. We run a lot of academic leadership programs and other leadership programs in different areas. And that's one of the biggest things that people would say they get out of our work is, I work in this institution where I didn't think I had any power, and now I feel like I do. Vulnerability, so the ability to kind of share, to think and reflect and question yourself and question your environment and feel okay with sort of expressing that, I think is a really important agent of change. And connection, you know, which is such an interesting thing at this time in this place where we are. But for me, in some ways, obviously, we're a society that's more and more connected, but we're also more and more disconnected all the time. And one of the things that I really think is kind of sometimes magical about our work is when people do stuff, they reflect on it and then they share it with others. There's this kind of vulnerability that opens up this new kind of connection with different people. And it creates really strong and very supportive communities. So those are the kind of things I'm interested in. So I wanted to talk you through these little projects, and then we'll do some Q&A. So this is funny because I talk about this a lot when I give talks, and it was so long ago. It was like one of the very first things we ever did, but I just loved it so much that I can't help bang on about it all the time. But this was a program that we worked on back in, I think, probably 2015-16. With a company, a factory called Church and Dwight. It's an American company, but with lots of factories, well, this factory and others in England. This is in Folkestone, and we'd been commissioned by them, by Creative Folkestone, who are an organisation based down there who run the Folkestone Book Festival, and had managed to get these guys to sponsor them. And they, it was in exchange for their sponsorship, they were keen to have something for their staff. Now, so it's about 500 staff here. They work in big factory, big factory floor. They have a warehouse. This is their canteen. And what we did with them is this is one of those, classic moments. And we were coming down from London. This is, obviously, like I said, we tend to work at that kind of middle level where we then get everyone else to work in their environment. But what we did was we went in and we said to a small group of the staff, maybe 30 of the 500 staff, come to this workshop and let's chat about what you like to do, what you like about work, what you don't like about work, how we might design something together that would be fun. So we did, and they all came. We had a great time at these workshops, and they came up with all these little creative challenges, so 3 or 4 or 5 minute challenges, and the idea was that they work in 12-hour shifts on the whole, and they each got extra 20-minute break once a week for 10 weeks to do these challenges. And it was really quite extraordinary, the transformation that happened, because they had set the challenges. It was their program. They decided what they were. They decided what the format was, how to run them, all of that sort of stuff. And we saw, this was one where they brought in and shared recipes. So the challenge was to share recipes, but a lot of them took it further and, brought in food from home to share with each other. That's something they've continued to do at the factory since then, is continue to kind of share food. The office were doing it, and the factory were doing it, and the warehouse were doing it. So 3 different teams, also, and within the factory, lots of different lines. So although they were working in their immediate teams, they also shared with each other, and they put up all the work all around the offices and the factory. And one of the things that I had a little video, but I think it'll probably be too long. But the thing that they were saying about it was 2 or 3 things. One, they were getting to know their co-workers in a way that they just never had before, even though some of them had worked there for 20 years. One of them was that there was a suggestions box. The manager said that there's a suggestions box in their office that very, very rarely had any suggestions in it, but now was really full, and people were taking a real interest in being engaged in their work, being decorating the canteen, doing stuff together. There was a kind of motivation to do that. And also this, someone says in the film, which I really like, they don't feel just like a number anymore. They feel like the management know who they are. They know who each other are, and it feels like a more of a family or a more of an environment that they want to be in. And like I said, the challenges ranged. One of my favourites, which I think is maybe one of the ones up on there in her picture, was they were talking about. The challenge was make a map of how you get to work. So, and that could be I ride my bike from here to here, or it could be I came to work from Somalia, as a big Somali community. I came from Somalia, I ended up here, I did this. So that idea that you were kind of sharing with people a bit about your life as well. So you could kind of, what we try and do with our challenges is you can always have them as a kind of frivolous little thing to do, or you can invest more in them if you want to, and it can become something more meaningful. The next project that I wanted to talk about in relation to that feeling of kind of agency, I'm going to take more control of what I do, is a project we did with Young Minds, who are a big national charity. And they were keen to get that. They have young activists, so people who with lived experience of mental health, who they wanted to do a campaign for Ofsted. So Ofsted had said that a long time ago that there was sort of stuff talked about around how there's too much focus on kids' attainment and grades and not enough on their kind of well-being or the environment of their school when schools were being judged by Ofsted. And so Young Minds wanted to put together a campaign, but they wanted that campaign to be led by young people, and it had to be a big professional campaign. So we worked with the young activists, and we helped them through a series of kind of creative workshops and creative challenges to come up with a brief for a professional agency, and then work alongside that agency to develop. They did a big parliamentary event. They made a film for social media. They made this really great illustration about what schools should be, and they wrote this open letter to Ofsted, which had huge pickup, was really successful, this campaign, won an award, because it was, what was so great is that it really felt like it was in the voices of young people. They had made it themselves, and their creativity is kind of what had empowered them to be able to speak so strongly about what they felt was important in creating a kind of good or outstanding school. And it has gone on to make significant changes with Ofsted. So those things are, there was a green paper recently, and so there's now, that has been a really effective campaign in changing the way that Ofsted look at how they assess schools, and those young people can feel that they made that change themselves. A project that you might know of ours, I know that this is probably one of the big projects that has the biggest reach in Northern Ireland, is the January Challenge. And the January Challenge is sort of one of our original campaigns. So we did it the very first, I think this year was the 8th year. It was one of the very first type things we ever did, or I did with my mates 8 years ago. And now this year, 50,000 people were doing it. We set a little creative challenge every day in January for people to do, think about, and share. And it has huge take up. So people from 5 to 85 do it. We have it it's all over the world in different countries. This says in 2020, 30,000 people took part, but we're just processing all the new updated stats from this year. But yeah, 50,000 people took part, and 98% of people would say that it had a positive impact on their well-being, which is really kind of extraordinary in terms of, it's a light touch little thing to do. But one of the things that we really encourage people to do is to share either on social media or in a WhatsApp group or in a small community. And we also develop packs for libraries and schools and offices and care homes so that they can own it themselves, take part. Then we release the challenges to them early so that they can kind of set it up and run it however they like. And it's such a lovely, beautiful, joyful campaign. This is a screenshot from my Instagram of people doing all sorts of different creative things. And I think this one, a few of these are about making a bird, so it can be something really simple, or leave a present for someone. Someone's left that little, that's a pocket of hope. So I'm creating a little messages of hope to send to people. And it's really simple things every day. And again, that idea that you can go as far as you like. You can spend 5 minutes, or you can spend the whole day, depending on what seems to work for you. And then, because of the success of the January challenge and this kind of big public thing where we know that people see an improvement in their well-being, we know that people go on to do more creative stuff as a result, we know people kind of form connections. There's this kind of magical thing that happens in the Facebook group of the January challenge where complete strangers are incredibly supportive to each other, and they talk about really difficult things. They talk about hard things that are going on in their lives. Sometimes the challenge will trigger a memory or a story, and that level of vulnerability is quite extraordinary. And then we have this, people really rally around people. So lots of people credit it as really getting them through January, and especially this January, which was particularly challenging for people. So as a result of that, a couple of years ago, we ran a project called Creativity in Mind, and this is my last example. So we'll get into some questions soon, so get thinking. I've already seen some characters come up we can talk through. But we decided to sort of test this theory that, when people do stuff and reflect on it and share it with a group of people, the connections, that ability to try something new and be a bit vulnerable, and then the opening that kind of creates to connect with each other, is really transformative. So we essentially took that model, that kind of 30-day model, and we trialed it in people who had experienced low-level mental health issues, depression, anxiety, and stress predominantly. And so we co-created the program with them. So we designed the 30 challenges. We worked with different artists and with a smaller group of people to kind of look at what those challenges would be. And then we ran it in WhatsApp groups. So there were 3 WhatsApp groups of 20 people. And they took part in these challenges over 30 days. And we worked with UCL psychology department to kind of look at what happened as a result. That's the logo. And we saw their well-being go up steadily. But what was really interesting with well-being is that because they stayed in those WhatsApp groups, we stopped giving them the challenges, but that kind of community of support continued, and their well-being continued to increase after the program had finished. And then we saw a really sharp decrease in depression, anxiety, and stress. That then, obviously, this is what normally happens with wellbeing trials. Obviously, the effect wears off after a little bit, but again, still maintain a much better level than before. So this is something that we're really interested in. We've just, this is my last slide, so I'm going to come out of it. You can find our website details anywhere. Where's my stop share button? Here we go. And we're now trialing, we're actually doing a big project for long COVID. So we're using a very similar model. I experienced long COVID last year. I was very ill for 6 months. And it was very isolating, very challenging. And so, this idea is to run we're running a similar project, started on Monday, with WhatsApp groups for long COVID patients. And really hoping we'll see a similar result, because there's not a lot out there treating long COVID. So yes, that's all I kind of wanted to say in terms of prepared talk. I'm just going to open my chat. Oh, I like it. I like seeing these people in the fest. I can't read it properly. I'm sorry. But anyway, there's some, I can see there's some characters in the chat. But yeah, those are the things I wanted to share. I really would love to have some questions. I know Pete might have some up his sleeve if we've got a slow start.
Jo, thank you very much. It was such a pleasure to get you involved in the festival, because, as I said in my introduction, I do think, our organizations are singing off the same hymn sheets. And, the intention of the festival when we set it up 7 years ago was to involve people in real practical skills in terms of how you can develop citizen actions and how, get involved in politics and ideas in a creative way. And in the past, we've run, for example, projects where we've asked people to send us photographs how they represent the city. We had a poetry and politics competition where we asked the person who won it was a complete newbie, first time poets, entrant. So yeah, we love this idea of getting our hands dirty in a sense, with creative projects, and that's why I thought your 4 case studies, really brought that to life. And I suppose people probably are coming to, your organization that they'll know. Perhaps the first thing about you is the January challenge, and I suppose if I could just kick that off. What is the take up of that like in Northern Ireland, and is that something that you think we should push for more in this part of the world?
Absolutely. I mean, we do get take up from Northern Ireland, and we have packs downloaded and people taking. We have individuals signing up, and as well as sort of facilitators using it. But yeah, I feel like that idea, like I was talking about this idea of kind of distributed facilitation, or we create these packs for the January challenge, and it's such a lovely thing to do because it's very simple. It was really helpful, I think, in lockdown. We did a very similar version to the January challenge called Create to Connect back in May, uh, early on in the pandemic, because lots of live groups had finished and lots of no people couldn't meet in person together. So this idea that you could do something really small every day, but you could stay in touch with your youth group or your community group or your school colleagues or kids within the school, but do it in a kind of fun, relaxed way. And I think, yeah, we do work with a lot of cultural organisations as well that run it in there as part of their kind of community engagement, I suppose. Yeah.
And I suppose COVID has just brought in a sharp relief, the importance of arts and culture, and how we can build, alliances and relationships and develop skills. I suppose, when you look at the success of programs like Grace and Perry, for example, and the whole growth of craftivism, how
Yeah.
arts and crafts have really taken off during COVID. I think this is a really opportune time, to, in a sense, advocate for the importance of creativity, not just in our own personal lives, but also I think structurally in terms of schools, how we can, in a sense, factor it in, to organizational culture, and other forms, if you like, of society. I note that, one of the questions coming in from Moira McGrath, she, first of all, thanks you for it. She loves the definition that you've used. But she asks, what connection can you see with creativity and climate emergency? Are these, if you like, processes, linked? And how would you respond to that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I was just having a conversation about it today, and we had a meeting about it a couple of weeks ago in the team because it's something that a lot of us feel really passionate about. And I think one of the things that again, it's like what I was saying. I think there's always a role for art and arts and professional artists and everyday creativity and lots of things. So a lot of I see the arts world addressing the climate emergency often through obviously addressing how they create work, but also thinking about kind of inspirational works, which are a brilliant way to kind of change people's minds and think about stuff. But for me, the exciting thing about everyday creativity is this idea of agency. And I think one of the things that was really interesting in this team meeting we were having the other day was about obviously with the climate emergency there are kind of it's yes, we can all make change. So that's one thing that we can do. We can, and when we use creativity and when we have kind of in behavior change, having that idea of a kind of network and connection is really important. So how can we use creativity to kind of create networks and people coming together to think differently and innovate together? I think that's really important. But also going back to that Young Minds case study, I think, climate is also about massive advocacy at a huge level. I've just moved literally 3 weeks ago to Stroud in Gloucestershire, which is the home of what's it called, Extinction Rebellion. But it's that idea that in order to create new stories and new narratives and get people engaged at a bigger level, I think that idea of everyday creativity and how we connect with each other and how we come together to tell stories is really it's really vital. You've got to innovate solutions, but we've also got to change minds and bring people on board and energize people.
And certainly we find within our festival, there's a real climate, of activism and interest in politics. We've just finished a competition where we invited people to submit proposals on art as a vehicle for change, where we offered a commission of £3,000
Mm.
to individuals or agencies to actually come up with a project that tackled, if you like, an aspect of political art, and we were bowled over by the quality and the number of submissions that we got. In fact, it's going to be a real problem now sifting them. This will teach us, in the middle of a festival, we're running these sorts of commissions, but it's a nice problem to have.
Yeah.
And we got a comment here from an anonymous attendee who asked, really, does the work you do with people and communities impact the artists that you work with, and if so, how?
Impact the artists. Sorry. So as in the
So how does it impact on the artists that you work with? Do you think they perhaps, just trying to pick up on the sentiment of the question, does it encourage perhaps more people to get involved in the formal arts field? Do they become more accomplished or more confident artists by being involved perhaps in your projects?
Yeah, it's really, I think one of the things that's really interesting is because we work with the idea of creativity as a kind of, as a very broad term. So, some of it will feel like stuff you would recognize as art, and some of it will not feel like that. But I would say that the biggest impacts that we see are, we see that impact on well-being. We know we see that impact on kind of development of connection and relationships. But yeah, one of the big things again in that sort of the survey of the January challenge this year, which is, I think 1,000 people filled in that survey. It's a really, it's a decent decent level of people. 95% of them said that they would go on to do more creative stuff as a result. And it's interesting, like my mum is, she was someone that when we were little, she really did loads of stuff with her. She was very creative. And then a number of things, she had a big accident, lots of things happened in her life. And, she just sort of kind of not done a lot of that stuff for a long time. And she did the January challenge sort of 6 or 7 years ago. And now she's like going to like art classes, and she's amazing. I mean, she's amazing. She's a really good visual artist. She's doing loads of really interesting stuff. And I think that's what I mean. We've always been interested in that idea that, for me, I'm most interested in the kind of social change aspect and the kind of what happens to you as a person and how you change as a person, how you feel. But I'm also really love it when people go on. We had a couple of emails just before the January challenge started this year to say, there was a woman who 3 years ago had, not done anything creative for a really long time. And she'd started doing cartoons as a result of the January challenge. She'd started drawing more, and now she's like employed by a newspaper to do comics and cartoons. So sometimes that happens, and that is amazing. And one of the things we're always trying to look at is how do we encourage people's development, and sometimes that's development as an artist, someone who might go on to be a professional artist, and sometimes it might be someone who goes on to be a leader of their community, or I think for me it's all about application of those kind of, is it skills skills or qualities that you get in yourself when you kind of wake up that creative bit of yourself.
And Joe, perhaps just moving on as well, I think we can all see, the powerful influences on personal development, that engagement with creative practice, can bring. But Stephen Hadley, I think, asks a very interesting question about connecting this type of work to structural change. He points out in higher education, they get lots of things like yoga, sort of lunchtimes, and mindfulness sessions, all these sort of personal development, sort of sessions. But he basically argues, but do we need better working conditions? Is that more important? I.e., structural change, not cosmetic change, as he puts it.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, Stephen. But yeah, it's really interesting. We're doing a big piece of work at the moment at the University of Edinburgh, and they got some funding from the Scottish Funding Council as part of the sort of pandemic support for the pandemic, looking at how do you support academics who have been particularly affected. And it's really interesting because so they approached us about training, and that's one of the things we do a lot of. We do a lot of academic training, and we sort of said, great, and we can't just teach people. Like we can do some work here about resilience and supporting people to kind of think differently and innovate differently and think about their research and how to kind of refocus and reprioritize. And we can, that's a lot of what we use kind of creativity and innovation for in that kind of leadership space. But unless they've got time to do it, and kind of they're given some research leave, or they're they're getting some admin support, or they're getting some practical help, that's not gonna work. So one of the things I think, and again, that is one of the conditions that we tend to try and have when we go into any, certainly in workplaces, that you can't just run a kind of mental health drive and expect everyone to be fine if you do some nice creative frilly things. It does have to be about structural change. So I would say that one of the things that is important is how you are empowering the individual, how the space for creative development is empowering the individual, but it's also helping them see that that change is broader. Like in order to really make change, that has to come from a structural level. And sometimes that's possible, and sometimes it's really hard. And sometimes part of the work is also about using creativity for resilience when, for your personal resilience when the system is against you, and when you're struggling, and when there's systemic injustice. So yeah, I think there's always a really fine line, but certainly one of the things that we look at when we're trying to, whether that's working within a library service in a local authority, or whether we're doing a program around unemployment in Westminster, it's kind of, I think in social change there's always a balance to be struck by helping, giving space for the individual to recognize they have ever so slightly more power than they think they do, and recognizing that the system is flawed, and that changes need to be made within that. And again, part of coming together as a community and working, thinking about how you forge networks within your community is also obviously part of structural change. But it's co-creation and structural change and all of that stuff is slow and ugly and not quick, and it's that kind of, it's frustrating, but it things move.
And I noticed that you've been, you were commissioned, I think, a number of years ago by Arts Council England to conduct a really large scale commission for them. I think you did something like 300 different consultations and all sorts of workshops up and down the country. But what do you think, realistically in this time of constrained budgets and the rest of it, that organizations like arts councils or these sort of agencies, what can they do realistically to foster creativity?
Well, I mean, I think there's, obviously Arts Council have sort of fairly significantly changed their policy. Yeah, at the moment we don't have a delivery plan or any sort of idea of how that will change, and obviously that's all been massively delayed through the pandemic. And I know Arts Council Wales have been doing a lot of work in this area for a while, and it's something that it's happening in UK-wide funders. We had a conversation with Esme Fairbairn Foundation maybe 5 years ago, where they literally like laughed in our face and was like, "What you do is not art." And then they like came to us maybe a year ago to say, "Oh, you're really interested in what you're doing," because they're really interested in kind of social change. And so we're thinking of applying to them for the first time, because we've never really had public funding properly before. So I think it's interesting. One of the things that I think again, it remains to be seen how Arts Council England will make that change happen. But the wording and the language that they're using around Let's Create, which is their new strategy, is very much about how do you see everyone as being creative and you start from there, as opposed to thinking about culture over here and everyone over there, and how do you make access to it. And I think ultimately it's challenging, because we're seeing the cultural sector start to change. And when we started doing what we are doing and I'm not saying we've been the change. There's been loads of people talking about this stuff for ages. But when we started in 2014, so many people were like, what are you talking about? Get out of here. And, we also thought what we were doing was really very damaging to professional artists. Whereas what we always have maintained is that professional artists are absolutely vital in an ecology and really important, and that, everyone has their place. Whereas now what we're getting a lot of is, please, can you help us learn how to do this a bit better? So there is change happening. And I think people are seeing the importance of it. I think the big thing is one of the things I think is really important is to recognize and see it as an ecology, but also really recognize the different important thing. I don't think it would be a great thing if Arts Council England gave loads of money to the Royal Opera House to do loads of community work, because they're not the specialists in that. There are loads of great community organisations, whether they're cultural organisations or they're community-led organisations, or they're just people getting together in their communities to do stuff. They're the people that know those communities. They're the people that know how to make change in those communities. They're the people that know them well. They don't need someone parachuting in from a organization that doesn't understand and to try and do that. So it's not, I don't think that there should be this push from funders saying everyone has to work like this in this particular way, because actually I don't think that's helpful. What it is important to do is to recognize how brilliant this kind of work can be, and to encourage it to empower lots of different kinds of voices to get little bits of money to do this sort of stuff, basically.
Just be psychic, because Moira has, asked a question there, and she's
Oh.
basically talking about parachuting into communities.
Yeah.
And she asked basically how you develop, ongoing relationships, with communities rather than just jumping in or parachuting. And, she basically wonders, how can you maintain longer term relationships with communities and community groups? And what are the big changes that you see in the longer term relationships that you're able to build that way?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that is the thing that I would say. It's something that's so interesting, because it's a lesson that we have learned over and over again. Is, on the whole, we don't work directly in communities. We tend to get, like I said, because we don't work with public funding. We either work sort of big and national, or if we're working in a local place, we'll be commissioned by a local authority or an organisation or whoever. And one of the things that we're really interested in is basically identifying in that community who is already embedded, who's already doing interesting stuff, what cool stuff is already happening there, what kind of creativity already exists, and kind of building from there. A lot of what we do is actually very boring stuff around structures and frameworks and who meets who and how they do, how to inject some creativity into that process. Because I think, whenever we have made the mistake of thinking, oh, we're really interested in this area, let's go over here and work directly with these people, it never goes right, because we don't know them well enough, and we don't, we do come in with a completely different power dynamic, and it's always a bit sticky. And we always think, oh yeah, we remember that. We forgot, we don't do that. And we always end up going back to instead working with, finding the people in those areas who then we work with to sort of look at, how are you currently working, what's working well, how can you build on that, what kind of creativity, what other stuff could be happening here, what do people want, how do you ask the right questions to understand what people want, how do you kind of create those spaces. So that's what I would say, because community development and being a person, being someone in that space over a long period of time is a completely different thing. It's it's a very specialist skill. It's, I know people who've worked in community development for 30, 40 years. They know what they're doing. They know those communities like that. I have huge respect for people who work like that. And often those people, they get very burnt out, very exhausted. There's not anyone fueling them. So a lot of what we've ended up doing when we've worked in, with people like that is about, how do you look after yourself? How do you kind of how do you keep feeling inspired, and how do you keep feeling well, so that you still got something to give in your community, and you can still be inspiring, because they're the people that, ultimately have the respect of the communities that they live in.
I think Priya asks an interesting question. She says, do you ever connect with organizations which have alternative structures? such as say cooperatives or member-led spaces. She asked if there's something you can say about these sort of alternative, if you like, community organizations which are becoming much more to the fore now.
Yeah, interestingly, I did that a lot in a previous life. I used to do before I started as I was starting 64 Million Artists, I did a lot of work with people around sort of supporting collectives around how they how they did good decision making together, because I'm really, really fascinated by it. Lots of arts collectives. I used to work a lot in kind of circus and street arts, and there's some really interesting kind of organizational dynamics there, especially when people like live together. It's all very complex. So I would say that, yeah, we don't at the moment, because, and this is something that we're starting to see as a difference. So for the last, however many years, 6-7 years, we on the whole have been brought in by people who could pay for us. So we've inevitably been brought in by bigger organizations. And now we're starting to A, have our own money, and B, be able to run things publicly. So we've been doing lots of, since lockdown, we've been doing a facilitating online groups series, which is pretty reasonably priced. That we put it out very cheaply at the beginning of the pandemic, just thinking this is an important thing for people to be able to do, is maintain that kind of democratic space online. And how do you do that, and how do you do it well and safely? So we're starting to get in those spaces, we're starting to get people coming to that who are kind of working in kind of cooperatives, or working in, or trying to set them up in communities. So looking at how do you kind of create decision-making processes. So we are now working kind of, with people in that way. But it is something that I'm really interested in. And like I said, we're often helping people to think about how you set up those kind of decision-making structures in communities. And I used to do a lot of work with an organization called the New Citizenship Project, who I really recommend for thinking about this sort of stuff. They wrote a really great report called The Citizen Shift, which is all about kind of moving from seeing people in society as consumers of stuff to kind of active participant in things. So they've done some really good writing, and they do some great talks and events and workshops and stuff about that stuff as well. But yeah, so that was a really long-winded way of answering. But we're starting with something we're starting to think about more organizationally.
And we have a question, how do you fund your work? You touched on it there, difficulties about being able to, receive funding to get down to that sort of grassroots sort of level of organizing and working. Is funding a problem for you?
Not the moment. It's a really interesting. Like I said, we've never, for the last sort of 6 years, if we've had funding from a, it's been one-off project funding, and it's never really been more than 10 or 20% of our budget. And we turn over about 300,000 a year, I would say, from a bit more now this year. And that's gone up significantly in the pandemic, which is interesting, obviously, because it's different to a lot of other people. And for the first time, so we're talking to Arts Council England and to Esme Fairbairn at the moment about kind of an ongoing, to going into both of them for sort of a 2 or 3 year grant, which could be interesting. Who knows, we'll get it. But it's interesting because one of the things I really love about, so most of our work comes from being commissioned by either community organisation, often local authorities, or cultural organisations within a community. And then we do, like I said, quite a lot of leadership training. So that's been really interesting for us, because it's kind of helped us fund, so it's higher paying clients essentially that cover, it's work that we love doing, because it's still within our, obviously academics are all people that are changing the world in their own way and having interesting, innovative thoughts about making change in the world. And a lot of what we do is work with them about how their work can have more impact, all of that sort of stuff. So it's work that we feel is within our value set, but it also pays better than your average community work. So we're able to kind of cover salaries that then gives us time to work on projects either for free, or things like the January challenge up until this year hadn't ever had funding, and we just did it on a shoestring, and it took up like 2 people's time for a lot of the year. And it's quite extraordinary that we never had money to do it, but we knew it was a good thing. We knew people loved it. People kept saying they wanted more, so we just did it, and we just kind of found money for it in different places. So yeah, I think it will be, the pandemic was really interesting for us because it gave us, we had this little moment at the beginning where we thought, are we going to lose all our clients and is it going to be awful? Then we managed to take all of our training online, so that all stayed. We did lose a couple of projects, and then we applied for, we got a small bit of emergency funding, which is, again, that was the first bit of money we'd had from the Arts Council in, like I said, in 3 or 4 years. And then we also applied for a loan. We got like a coronavirus loan, and we thought we weren't going to need it, but it was really brilliant. It was the best thing we did last year because it gave us time to think, what is our value? What can we do in this situation? What are the really important questions to be asking? That's when we decided to put the training out there. That's when we created Create to Connect. Because we had this kind of cushion, we just sort of trusted that we would find the money and that people would commission us from somewhere. And they did, because we were out there doing stuff and putting stuff out there, and because we kind of covered our salaries by getting this loan. And then as a result, kind of, added a third onto our turnover last year. So, and I like not having lots of public funding because it means that I like the kind of interesting thing about feeling like you're being directly commissioned by a community, like, so you're directly responsible to them. It's not like you say, oh, I'm really interested in this, let's go over here. It's like, there's something interesting in that. And also, hopefully with a bit of public funding in the future, we'll be able to do stuff like, really use the January challenge to get further and wider and work with more people and do more of that training and all of that sort of stuff.
Well, I hope that is the case. It's been a thoroughly, stimulating discussion with you. As I say, so much, I think, of the experience, has been shared, not only, with our attendees, many of whom work, in the arts and cultural sector, and but also as a festival, we don't receive any public funding either. And ironically, through the pandemic, we've been able to actually increase our funding through emergency funds. So there is some positive in all of this gloom and pain. Just to flag up, tomorrow we actually have your colleague, Chris, delivering a workshop for us, which I'm afraid is sold out. It's full. We restricted to 20 participants, and they quickly filled up. So it's great to have your colleague involved. And that'll be a very interesting workshop, and I'm sure the participants in our festival will really appreciate that. But I hope that we can have a continuing relationship with yourselves, that your work will go from strength to strength, and that you'll follow our festival, because we'll certainly follow your work. And I'd like to thank you for your participation, and all the best for the pregnancy. And
thanks.
The important things coming up in your life.
Yeah. It's really lovely to be in. Yeah, thanks for all your questions. It was great. It's always nice to have a really engaged set of people asking questions. So thank you. And hopefully we'll be back again.
Lovely. Thanks again now.
Thanks.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone.